Hello, friends. It's your boy Jeff here with you. Happy New Year. We're starting off 2020 the right way, hopefully, with Stephen King. um, this is another video continuing my reading project with the great Stephen King. And in fact, you can see I got this shirt here as a Christmas present from Beth over at B-Side Records. She sent this to me during last month during the Christmas season. So, and Stephen King does indeed rule. So I'm wearing it for this video. It's New Year's Day as I record this, and just yesterday, New Year's Eve, I finished Duma Key. This is the last Stephen King book that I've read for 2019, and I had to push a little bit to get to finish it because I wanted to start the new year with clear decks, start something new. So this was one of the books that I'd never read before, covering that half of my project where I alternate between books I've never read and revisiting books that I've read before and loved. So Duma Key was one of the few that are left that I've never read by him. So, and it's his biggest book that I've read of his since It. This clocks in at like 610 pages. And I just have to say, this book is an anomaly in King's catalog because usually the way it goes with Stephen King books, most of them, is you get a lot of great setup, you get a lot of great character development. Well, sometimes you get good plot, sometimes it's just kind of in the background there waiting. And, he'll go on and he'll tell his story, and then eventually he'll get to the end, and, sometimes he'll finish it good, sometimes not, sometimes he'll just kind of leave you hanging. This book is kind of flips that script. I have to say, I had the hardest time getting into this book out of any of his in recent memory because when I started reading it, I didn't get a lot of great character development. I didn't get a lot of great setup. The main character, Edgar Fremantle, I'm going to try not to be too spoilery, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, so be warned. He has an accident. I'm not really spoiling anything by saying this. He has an accident early on in the book. He's a construction guy. He owns his own construction company, and he's involved in an accident with a crane. Almost gets killed, but in the process, he loses his right arm, and he has, severe skull fractures, and he's just messed up from this accident. So, as part of his recovery, and he lives in Minnesota, up in Minneapolis, originally. So, he moves from there down to Florida, down to Western Florida, to Duma Key, which is, of course, the name of the book. And from there, he meets this, he's kind of by himself. He rents this house for a year, and he starts painting. He's always had like these little artistic inclinations, but after living in, you can see the house there. He calls the house Big Pink. And after living there for a little while, he takes it upon himself to start painting. So while he's doing that, he's getting more and more into it, and he meets his neighbors down the beach, who turns out to be, the owner of Big Pink that he's renting it from, and it goes on from there. And my experience with this book, your mileage may vary with this book, but my experience was it didn't really grab me right away because put it bluntly, it just wasn't all that interesting. I mean, I would read it, I'd be like, okay. I'd put it down for a couple days. I'd come back to it. I'd read another 30, 40 pages. Be like, okay, you know, nothing much is happening. And here's just the back cover. All of these things are integral to the story. For those of you who've read this book, you know what I'm talking about. But it just didn't grab me. And I was like, man, I wasn't going to put it down because that would defeat the entire purpose of my reading project. I wasn't going to start a King book and not finish it, which my wife marveled at because that's not her way. And it's really not my way either, but I was determined to read everything by this guy. So I'm like, all right, something's got to happen here soon. I'll be honest, it wasn't until I got past like page 450 out of a 600-page book where things really started to click for me. And once it did, it was just like the old King magic, and I couldn't put it down. But getting to that point was pretty arduous, I have to say. So when I say I like this book, I actually like the end of it better than the beginning. Usually it's the other way. You know, usually the story starts out great and then kind of... But in this case, everything goes up as you get more towards the end. Who knows? I don't know what he was doing when he was writing this. I don't know what his creative process was, but the story comes together beautifully, and the ending was actually pretty good. So, like I said, I'm not going to get, too spoilery with it, but it's a lot for him to explain, and there are long stretches of us finding out exactly what's going on the island. But overall, I liked it. Man, the first half of this book is really rough. It was really rough for me to get through. So I don't know what else to tell you. I can't say I can recommend this because, you can't really recommend a book where you're like, man, it really doesn't get good until about page 400 or so. And you're like, what? That's novel length right there for most authors. But for King, he's just getting started. And that's the case in this book. He really doesn't get rolling until you get to the page like 400, 450 mark. That's just how it went with me. But the characters I really didn't care for all the way through. I don't know why. Edgar seemed... He was kind of your prototypical King male character lead, but for some reason it just didn't click with me. And his friend Jerome Wireman, who's like a caretaker of the house, down the beach, and Elizabeth is the owner. She's very elderly and she has Alzheimer's, and she ends up dying. Just spoiler, but that really doesn't affect the story because, ironically enough, it isn't until after she dies that this book takes off. So that's my wife. She's sitting next to me. She's coughing. So, yeah, it wasn't until after Elizabeth Eastlake, that was her name, passes, and we find out her history on the island, and that's when the book took off. One other nagging complaint that I have with King, and it happens in this book, it happens in other books of his too, is that he foreshadows something needlessly. There's another character in this book that dies that's very close to Edgar. And way before that happens, King telegraphs it by having Edgar say, this was the last time I ever saw her. And then at that point, it takes all of the shock away from that event happening, and you're just down to the point where you're like, well, okay, when is this going to happen? You're just waiting for it to happen. There's no shock. There's no. It takes the power of that event away. And King does that in this book, and he's done it in other books too, and I don't know why. It serves no purpose for the story to telegraph it that early. I mean, I don't know why he does it, but it's a nagging complaint that I've had with several of his books. I haven't really brought it up before, but it was very boldly expressed here. And it drives me crazy because you're just like, you don't really care, you know? Uh, that maybe that's just me. I don't know. But like I said, it's hard for me to recommend this book because it takes so long, and you can see how thick it is. It's a long book. It took me, about a month and a half to get through this, which is kind of long for me for a King book because usually, I get into them and I just don't want to put them down until I'm done. That didn't happen till way late in the game here, so I'll quit harping on that point. But yeah, I probably won't want to read this again, but I'm glad I did. I know a lot of people love this book. I've seen it on Fuego's Hail to Stephen King Facebook site page that, a lot of people love this book. They think it's one of his best, da 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 da. I can agree up to a certain point. This definitely could have been much shorter. This definitely could have been a much shorter book. But, like I said, the ending, ironically enough, was great. So, it's kind of the opposite of the way King works with his novels. There you go. So, Duma Key, my last King book of 2019. And there's no plans for me to stop on this project. I'm still very much into reading King and Joe Hill too. I'll be mixing more Joe Hill in 2020 once I finish. There's 2 books left by King that I haven't read yet. So probably, in another month or 2 or 3, I'll be going through Joe Hill's catalog because I've only read like 2 of his books. So that's the plan. And in fact, I'm going to start 2020 by revisiting Pet Sematary. That's going to be the first King book of 2020 that I read. So I remember this book faintly. I had the paperback in, was it 7th grade or 8th grade? So 35 years it's been, I think, since I've read this book last. So I tracked down the hardcover, and this is much shorter than Duma Key, so you'll probably get another King video out of me sooner than later. I know it's been a while. So, yeah, that's where I'm going with this. Lisey's Story and Full Dark No Stars are the 2 that I still have to read that I've never read before by King. So, that's it. Hope everyone had a great New Year celebration, if you celebrated. And hoping for a lot of good things to happen in 2020. So keep hope alive. Until next time, peace, everyone. Be good, and I'll see you again soon. And of course, Stephen King rules.